In 1994, a soundstage somewhere in Las Vegas, Martin Scorsese is behind the camera, directing what will become one of the greatest mob films ever made. Sitting in a chair right next to him, closer than any actor on set is allowed to get, is a 56-year-old ex-hitman named Frank Cullotta. He is watching Joe Pesci recreate his best friend's life. He is being paid to make sure they get the violence right. Later, he will step in front of the camera himself, playing a gray-haired killer who shoots a man twice in the back of the head in a steakhouse parking lot. It is not much of a stretch. He has done it before for real. This man admitted to over 300 crimes, 4 murders. He ran the most brazen burglary crew Las Vegas had ever seen. He was the childhood best friend and right-hand enforcer of Tony Spilotro, the most feared man in the Nevada desert. And then he betrayed him. He gave the FBI everything. Names, dates, bodies. He should be dead. In this world, men who talk do not usually make it to old age. But Frank Cullotta did not just survive. He ended up in Hollywood, telling his own story, on his own terms. This is the story of the most dangerous man in casino who was not in the film, until he was. Frank Cullotta was born on December 14, 1938, in Chicago, Illinois. He grew up in a neighborhood they called The Patch, a working-class Italian enclave on the west side near Grand and Ogden, just doors away from future outfit boss Tony Accardo. His father, Joseph Raymond Cullotta, was an independent criminal, never formally connected to the Chicago outfit but respected on the street. He was known as the best wheelman in Chicago. He drove getaway cars. He was also violent at home. He beat his wife. He beat his children. Frank's older sister Jean shielded him from the worst of it. When Frank was about 9, his father was killed in a high-speed police chase. The car crashed. Joseph Cullotta did not walk away. And despite the abuse, despite everything, young Frank idolized the man. He decided right then he was going to follow in his father's footsteps. He was expelled from public school, trade school, and reform school before landing at Steinmetz High School in 1953. He dropped out in the 9th grade at roughly 16 years old. School was not built for kids like Frank. The streets were. His first crimes were small, stealing a paperboy's collection envelopes and collecting cash from bookies at a newsstand run by an uncle. Then came the bars, robbing them one after another, carefully avoiding anything connected to the outfit. You steal from a citizen, that is your business. You steal from a connected bar, that is a funeral. Then driving getaway cars, just like his old man. Then burglary, armed robbery, arson. By the time he was 20, Frank Cullotta had a reputation on the West Side. Not as an outfit man, he was too independent for that, but as someone who could be trusted to do the work and keep his mouth shut. And then he met the kid who would change everything. Frank Cullotta met Tony Spilotro while both were shining shoes on Grand Avenue in the Patch, sometime in the early to mid-1950s. Both were born in 1938. Spilotro called out to him from across the street and told him to stay off his territory. They were rivals for about a week. Then they discovered their fathers had known each other. Joe Cullotta had once killed men who had been extorting the Spilotro family restaurant for protection money. That connection, blood repaying blood, forged an instant bond. They attended the same reform school, they stole cars together, they fought rival gangs side by side. Spilotro once told Cullotta that one day he would be boss of the outfit. Their paths split as they got older. Spilotro rose through the outfit's ranks under the mentorship of Mad Sam DeStefano, one of the most sadistic loan sharks in Chicago history. Cullotta preferred independence. He ran his own small crew and answered to nobody. But the loyalty between them held. It was forged in the Patch, and it would take 30 years and a wiretap to break it. In the late 1950s and into the 1960s, Chicago belonged to the outfit. Gambling, unions, loan sharking, they had their hands in all of it. The Sam Giancana era was giving way to Joey Aiuppa's more cautious leadership. Street crews operated semi-independent, but everyone kicked money up. In the patch, you grew up in that world, or you didn't grow up at all. And there was one detail about Cullotta's position that would matter later, when the time came to decide who lives and who dies. He was never formally made, always an associate, never inducted. In the outfit's eyes, that made him expendable. Their bond was not built on trust. It was built on something stronger. Murder. In 1962, two young burglars, Billy McCarthy and Jimmy Miraglia, got drunk and killed 3 people outside a bar called the Black Door. Among the dead were Ron and Phil Scalvo, whose father was close friends with Tony Accardo. An innocent cocktail waitress died too. This was an unsanctioned triple homicide in outfit territory, a death sentence for whoever pulled the triggers. Mad Sam DeStefano assigned Spilotro to find the killers. Spilotro traced them to Cullotta's circle, and he gave Frank a choice that was not really a choice: set up Billy McCarthy or die alongside him. Cullotta picked up the phone. He called McCarthy and told him he had a burglary planned. "Meet me at a Howard Johnson's restaurant." McCarthy showed up. Spilotro took Cullotta's car and left him with an associate. 40 minutes later, Spilotro returned. Over the next 3 days, he tortured McCarthy, beating him, stabbing him with ice picks, then placing his head in a vise and squeezing until one of his eyes popped out of the socket. McCarthy gave up Miraglia's name. Spilotro slit his throat. Miraglia was strangled shortly after. Both bodies, badly decomposed and infested with maggots, were found in the trunk of an abandoned car on Chicago's South Side on May 14th and 15th, 1962. The case went unsolved for over 20 years. Then Cullotta testified. That was the moment Tony Spilotro's reputation as an enforcer was cemented, and it was the moment Frank Cullotta's fate was permanently linked to his. Through the mid-1960s, Cullotta kept building his own crew, burglaries, robberies, the usual grind. In 1968, he was convicted of burglary and sentenced to 8 years. He was paroled by the state in 1972, transferred to Terre Haute for the federal portion, and released in 1974. By then, the world had changed. While Cullotta sat in prison, Spilotro had been sent to Las Vegas in 1971 as the Chicago outfit's enforcer on the ground. His job was to oversee the casino skim operations that were funneling millions back to the bosses. Spilotro kept asking Cullotta to come out west, to join him in Las Vegas. Cullotta kept saying no. Then, in 1978, he got a call he could not refuse. Joey Lombardo, known as the Clown and boss of the Grand Avenue crew, summoned Cullotta directly and told him he was going to Las Vegas, that he was the only one Spilotro trusted out there. When a crew boss gives you a direct order, you do not negotiate, you pack your bags. Cullotta moved to Las Vegas in late 1978. When he arrived, Cullotta told Spilotro he needed a crew. Spilotro told him he had permission to steal, but that was not true. The Chicago bosses had explicitly prohibited street crime in Las Vegas. The casino skim was worth millions a year. Burglaries drew heat, drew headlines, and drew the FBI. Spilotro had gone rogue, and now Cullotta was his instrument. Cullotta assembled the hole-in-the-wall gang, named by the media for their signature method of drilling or smashing through exterior walls, ceilings, and roofs to bypass door and window alarm systems. They used power tools, cutting torches, sledgehammers, and hydraulic jacks. The crew included Joe Blasco, an ex-Las Vegas Metro cop who had been fired in 1978 after confidential information was found in Spilotro's possession. Leo Guardino and Ernie Davino were Las Vegas-based burglars. Larry Newman, known as Crazy Larry, was later sentenced to life. Wayne Matecki flew in from Chicago for specific jobs. Sal Romano turned out to be an FBI informant inside the gang. Herbert Blitzstein, known as Fat Herbie, ran the Gold Rush jewelry store on West Sahara Avenue and fenced stolen goods for the crew. They used tipsters, hotel staff, valets, and casino employees to identify targets with large cash or jewelry holdings. A valet spots a high roller leaving the Tropicana with $50,000 in his jacket. A hotel maid notices a jewelry case in a guest's room. A casino host mentions which whales are out of town for the weekend. Each tipster got a percentage of the take. The system was efficient, professional, and relentless. The method itself was brutally simple. Most home security in Las Vegas in the early 1980s focused on doors and windows, and motion detectors were rare. So the gang bypassed all of it. They would drive to a target house in the middle of the night, cut through the exterior wall with power saws and torches, step inside, and clean the place out. Sometimes they went through the roof, sometimes through the garage. Sometimes they just smashed through cinder block with sledgehammers and hydraulic jacks. By 1981, Cullotta estimated they had pulled 250 to 300 residential burglaries in Las Vegas, plus dozens of commercial jobs. Spilotro took a cut of everything, and he hid every dollar of it from the bosses back in Chicago. That was the part that would get people killed. The most violent act came on October 10, 1979. Sherwin Jerry Lisner was a 46-year-old con man who had been working with Cullotta on a fraud scheme. On July 11, he was arrested by the FBI and charged with interstate transportation of stolen property. He posted $75,000 bail and was set to face trial on October 29 in Washington, D.C. Then Lisner's attorney made a fatal mistake. He told Joe Pig Pignatello, owner of the connected Villa d'Este restaurant, that his client planned to testify against big gangsters, meaning Spilotro, meaning Cullotta. When Spilotro heard, the order was simple. He said, "Well, you know you gotta whack him now, don't you?" Cullotta flew to Chicago, recruited Wayne Matecki, and flew back. That night, he called Lisner and arranged to come over while Lisner's wife worked her shift at the Aladdin Hotel. Lisner had no reason to suspect anything. They were partners, friends even. Cullotta entered the house and shot Lisner multiple times in the head with a .22 caliber pistol. But Lisner was a big man, and a .22 caliber does not always do the job. He survived the initial shots. A brutal fight erupted through the house, some furniture overturned, blood on the walls. Cullotta tried to strangle him with a power cord from a water cooler. The cord snapped. He reloaded and fired again. This time, Lisner stayed down. Cullotta dumped the body in the backyard swimming pool. It was found around 4:30 a.m. on October 11, 1979. Here's the detail that made this killing a death sentence for both men. Spilotro never got permission from Chicago for the hit. That was a violation of the rules. And in the outfit, violations do not get forgotten. They get stored. They get used. The end of the hole-in-the-wall gang came on July 4th, 1981. The target was Bertha's Gifts and Home Furnishings at 896 East Sahara Avenue. The estimated score was $1 million in jewelry and goods. They chose Independence Day, figuring fireworks would cover the noise of drilling through the roof. What they did not know was that Sal Romano had been feeding everything to the FBI. Agent Dennis Arnoldi had a full surveillance team in place, agents hidden behind rooftop air conditioning units, and an FBI plane circling overhead. The arrest order came over the radio. 6 men went down: Cullotta, Blasco, Guardino, Davino, Neumann, and Matecki. Spilotro was not there, but he was later indicted on federal racketeering charges. The hole-in-the-wall gang was finished. The friendship that survived 30 years of crime, 4 murders, and hundreds of burglaries was about to be destroyed by one wiretap recording. In this life, there are only 2 endings: prison or the grave. Cullotta was about to choose a third. After the Bertha's arrest, Spilotro did something that strained the bond more than any bullet ever could. He failed to provide legal assistance. 30 years of loyalty, and when Cullotta needed a lawyer, the phone went silent. But that was not what broke him. In early 1982, while Cullotta was locked up on the Bertha's charges, FBI agents came to visit. They played him a recording, a wiretap, Tony Spilotro's voice discussing the need to clean our dirty laundry. Cullotta understood exactly what that meant. He was the dirty laundry. He was the one who had pulled the trigger on Lisner, the murder Spilotro had ordered without Chicago's permission. The bosses were furious. And now, according to Cullotta, a contract on his life had been approved. His childhood best friend had signed off on it. But here is where the story gets complicated. At the February 1986 federal trial, under cross-examination, Cullotta admitted something that changes the entire narrative. He later found out there was no contract. He acknowledged lying to his own mother and brother about the death threat. Whether the contract was real or just a convenient justification for the decision he had already made remains one of the most significant unresolved questions in this story. And that ambiguity, that is not a flaw in the narrative. That is the narrative. The line between survival and betrayal is exactly where Frank Cullotta spent his entire life. On May 18, 1982, FBI Las Vegas Bureau Chief Joseph Yablonsky publicly announced Cullotta's cooperation. By July, the formal agreement was signed. His handler was Special Agent Dennis Arnoldi, the same man who had led the Bertha's bust. Arnoldi would later call Cullotta the single most important witness in the breakup of Spilotro's organization. The debriefings ran daily, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. for roughly a month. First Las Vegas Metro Police, then the FBI. Cullotta admitted to over 300 crimes, more than 200 burglaries, 50-plus armed robberies, 25 extortions, 25 arsons, and 4 murders. His information cleared over 50 unsolved Las Vegas burglaries and identified casino employees who had been feeding tips to the gang. Most damaging of all, he revealed that Spilotro had been secretly pocketing a share of every burglary, money the Chicago bosses never knew about. He also named Joey Lombardo as the man who authorized murders, saying, "Make sure you clear it with Joe Lombardo, especially hits." The testimony tour began in February 1983, when Cullotta took the stand in Chicago at a sentencing hearing for Teamsters President Roy L. Williams and Joey Lombardo, both convicted of conspiring to bribe a U.S. senator. He testified alongside fellow informant Jimmy the Weasel Fratiano. Then came the main event, October 1983, Cook County. Cullotta testified against Spilotro in the M&M murders case and the Lisner conspiracy. He admitted to more than 300 crimes and 4 murders on the stand. The outcome? Spilotro was acquitted. The presiding judge, Thomas Maloney, ruled that Cullotta lacked credibility. Maloney himself was later convicted in 1992 for taking bribes in murder cases. That acquittal has a stain that can never be washed out. February through April 1986, Las Vegas. Cullotta testified over multiple days at the federal racketeering trial of Spilotro and 11 Keogh defendants. He admitted to receiving $16,800 a year in government support and roughly $100,000 total in payments. The outcome? Mistrial, declared April 8, 1986. Spilotro was photographed smiling as he left the courthouse. A retrial was scheduled for late June. Cullotta's deal looked like this. He was initially sentenced to 10 years, reduced to 8 years after a courtroom outburst. He served approximately 2 years at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in San Diego. He was paroled in March 1984 directly into the Witness Security Program. He received immunity for all previously uncharged crimes, including murders, and had his tax liability on criminal profits wiped clean. He was relocated under assumed names to Fort Worth, Texas, Estes Park, Colorado, Biloxi, and Gulfport, Mississippi, and Mobile, Alabama. He left the program voluntarily. His reasoning was simple. Anyone who wanted him dead was either in prison or in a grave. Tony Spilotro never made it to that retrial. June 14th, 1986. Just days before the rescheduled trial was set to begin, Tony and his brother Michael Spilotro left Michael's townhouse in Oak Park, Illinois, around 2 in the afternoon. They climbed into Michael's 1986 Lincoln Continental. Both men had removed all valuables and personal identification from their pockets. Michael told someone before he left that if he was not back by 9 o'clock, it was no good. He told his daughter Michelle he loved her at least 10 times before walking out the door. James Marcello picked them up and drove them to a house in Bensonville, Illinois, a quiet DuPage County suburb near O'Hare Airport. The pretext was a ceremony. Michael was to be made a full member of the outfit. Tony was to be promoted to capo. It was the kind of invitation you do not turn down, the kind that makes a man feel honored, the kind that gets you killed. When they walked down into the basement, 10 or more outfit killers were waiting. There was no ceremony, no oath, no candle, no saint's card. The beating started immediately. They were attacked with fists and kicked, not baseball bats as the film Casino later showed. The violence was raw and personal. Tony Spilotro, the man who had terrorized Las Vegas for 15 years, reportedly looked at his executioners and asked if he could say a prayer. There was no reply, just more blows. The cause of death for both brothers was multiple head and neck injuries from blunt force trauma, their lungs and airways filled with blood. The bodies were transported south to a cornfield in the Willow Slough Preserve near Enos, Indiana, about 60 miles southeast of Chicago. They were buried 5 feet deep, stacked one on top of the other, stripped to their undershorts. 8 days later, on June 22nd, a farmer named Michael Kins noticed freshly turned earth while spreading chemicals. The corn shoots were only 4 inches high, not nearly enough to hide the disturbance. Autopsies were completed June 24th. Identification came through dental records supplied by the brothers' sibling, Patrick Spilotro, a dentist. Tony was 48, Michael was 41. The order came from the top: Joey Aiuppa, head of the Chicago outfit. Aiuppa blamed Spilotro for drawing the federal attention that resulted in his own conviction in the strawman casino skimming case in January 1986. He received 28.5 years. At his age, that was a death sentence with a release date he would never see. That kind of sentence makes men vengeful. And Spilotro, facing 3 separate indictments and a rescheduled racketeering trial, had become the most expensive liability in outfit history. The bosses had tolerated his violence. They had tolerated his affair with Lefty Rosenthal's wife. They'd even tolerated the unauthorized street crime. But losing the skim, losing billions that they could not forgive. 2 decades later, in September 2007, the truth came out at the Operation Family Secrets trial. James Marcello was specifically convicted of the Spilotro murders and sentenced to life in prison. The hit squad had included Nicholas Calabrese, Louis the Mooch Aboli, James LaPietra, John DeFranzo, Sam Carlisi, Rocky Infelice, and others. And Cullotta? His cooperation was one of 5 Spilotro underlings who flipped, creating a cascade of legal pressure that made Tony untouchable in the worst possible way. His revelation that Spilotro was secretly skimming from his own operations shattered what little trust remained. The outfit ran the numbers and made a calculation. They could not risk Spilotro going through 4 consecutive trials. Cullotta himself later said he would have carried out the hit if ordered. That is the kind of honesty that makes you wonder what loyalty ever meant in the first place. If your childhood best friend ordered your death, could you do what Cullotta did? Let me know in the comments. But the man who helped destroy the outfit's Las Vegas empire was about to profit from it in a way no one saw coming. Because Frank Cullotta's story did not end in a cornfield, it ended in Hollywood. The path to Martin Scorsese's Casino started during witness protection, when FBI handler Dennis Arnoldi connected Frank Cullotta with journalist Nicholas Pileggi. Pileggi spent roughly 8 years interviewing Cullotta for his nonfiction book Casino, Love, and Honor in Las Vegas. When Scorsese adapted the book into the 1995 film, Cullotta was hired as a paid technical advisor. He spent about 4 months on set with a personal bodyguard. He sat right next to Scorsese during filming. No actor on set had that privilege. Not De Niro, not Pesci, not Sharon Stone. The real gangster sat closer to the director than any of the actors playing gangsters. Cullotta said that he more or less told Scorsese that if a scene was not right, Scorsese would change it, and that Scorsese followed his advice because he wanted honesty and reality in the movie. Pileggi told Cullotta flat out that there would have been no book or movie Casino without Pileggi. The character Frank Marino, played by Frank Vincent, was based on Cullotta, Nicky Santoro's loyal right-hand man. Cullotta also appeared in an uncredited cameo as Curly, a gray-haired hitman who shoots Andy Stone, played by Alan King, twice in the back of the head in a parking lot. He was essentially recreating one of his own real-life killings on camera. One thing about the film bothered him. In the movie, Frank Marino participates in the murder of the Santoro brothers, the scene based on the Spilotro killings. In reality, Cullotta had nothing to do with that. He was in witness protection when Tony and Michael were beaten to death in that basement. Scorsese convinced him to accept the change, arguing that Nicky could only be lured to his death by a trusted friend. Cullotta also said the real Vice scene from the M&M murders was gorier in real life than what ended up on screen, and that the Spilotro brothers were beaten with fists, not bats. The money Cullotta earned from the film went somewhere nobody expected. It paid for his granddaughter's liver transplant. She survived several good years before passing away in October 2005 at age 19. Blood money. Buying time for a child's life. That is the kind of detail no screenwriter would dare invent. After leaving witness protection, Frank Cullotta eventually returned to Las Vegas permanently around 2013 or 2014 and reinvented himself as perhaps the most publicly visible ex-mobster in American life. He wrote 3 books with true crime author Dennis N. Griffin, including his definitive autobiography Cullotta in 2007 with a foreword by Pileggi, Hole in the Wall Gang, In My Own Words in 2014, and The Rise and Fall of a Casino Mobster in 2017, which told Tony Spilotro's story through Cullotta's eyes. He launched a mob tour business called Frank Cullotta's Casino Mob Tour, a 2-hour bus ride through real locations from the film Casino and actual crime scenes. The route included the house where he killed Lisner, the Bertha's site, Piero's Italian Cuisine, and the spot where Lefty Rosenthal's car was bombed. Tickets cost about $100 and included a personal Q&A with Cullotta, an autographed book, and a pizza party. Cullotta appeared on AMC's The Making of the Mob, Chicago, National Geographic's Locked Up Abroad and Bar Rescue. His Vlad TV interview racked up over 290,000 views. He also showed up on Valuetainment, Soft White Underbelly, and dozens of podcasts. In January 2020, he launched a YouTube channel called Coffee with Cullotta with Las Vegas entertainer Adam Flowers, and it hit 50,000 subscribers in 7 months. He was insistent about one distinction. He said he was not an informant but a government witness. As co-author Dennis Griffin explained, he never wore a wire and never went out trying to entrap anybody. On the subject of killing, Cullotta was matter-of-fact. He said, "If you do think about it, it'll put you in the nut house. Of course it bothers me. But if I thought about it 24 hours a day, I'd wind up in my car with a gun in my mouth." He compared his experience to military service, carrying out orders. The Mob Museum's Jeff Schumacher noted something unexpected. Cullotta showed genuine remorse in his later years. "Not every killer showed remorse," Schumacher said, "but he did." And that is the unresolved tension at the center of Frank Cullotta's entire life. Was the death contract from Spilotro real? Under oath in 1986, he admitted it may not have existed. In every interview, every book, every bus tour, he swore it was. That ambiguity is not a gap in the story, it is the story. The distance between survival and betrayal, between self-preservation and the code, is razor thin. And Frank Cullotta walked that line for 40 years. 5 of Spilotro's men flipped. The code held for none of them. But unlike Henry Hill, who faded into obscurity, or Sammy Gravano, who went back to crime running an ecstasy ring in Arizona, Cullotta left witness protection voluntarily. He reclaimed his real name. He moved back to Vegas, and he never committed another crime. Retired Las Vegas detective David Groover put it this way: he was a killer who turned out to be a law-abiding citizen. When he turned, it changed everything. Everything crumbled, and it was pretty much over. What Cullotta's story reveals is something most people already know but will not say out loud. There is no code. There is no loyalty. There is only the calculation of who is useful and who has become a problem. Even your childhood best friend, the kid you shined shoes with on Grand Avenue, the kid you set up a man to die for, the kid who said he'd be boss someday, will sign off on your death if the bosses demand it. The code of silence, omerta, the idea that these men live and die by some kind of honor, is the biggest lie organized crime ever sold. Frank Cullotta proved it. Frank Cullotta figured that out in 1982. It took the rest of them a lot longer. On August 20th, 2020, at approximately 12:50 in the morning, Frank Cullotta died in a Las Vegas hospital. He was 81 years old. The cause was complications from COVID-19 combined with congestive heart failure and other pre-existing conditions. His YouTube partner Adam Flowers believed he may have unknowingly transmitted the virus to Cullotta while asymptomatic. Nicholas Pileggi had spoken with him just 3 weeks before about upcoming projects. Dennis Griffin wrote, "Frank may be gone, but he'll never be forgotten." He was survived by his brother Joseph, his wife Elaine Costanza, his daughter Angela Russo, and his stepdaughter Kim Costanza. The FBI still maintains a publicly accessible file on Frank Cullotta in their online vault, a quiet acknowledgement of just how much damage one man's testimony can do. The man who admitted to 4 murders, over 300 crimes, and the betrayal of his oldest friend died of a virus. No bullet, no prison cell, a hospital bed. The last living link to the Spilotro era, gone. The outfit's Las Vegas empire took dozens of men to build, and one man's testimony to tear apart. Somewhere on the Las Vegas Strip, the mob tour buses still run. Different guides now. Same stops, same story, but nobody tells it quite the way Frank did.